Okay, welcome. So today is it's our Tuesday Bliss Techniques meeting, and I'm happy that you're here. Um, Apparently, changing the name does not change turnout, but the right people are here. So today we are, as I had promised to those who are here live at least, we're going to be exploring some restorative yoga themes. And I'll explain what that is and why momentarily. It's good, the reasons why. And so I had suggested that some props will be helpful. So if for those who are going to watch this on YouTube after the fact, you'll probably want to know what those props are. So I recommend that you're going to have, well, first of all, if you happen to have a yoga bolster, that would be excellent. But most people are not going to have one. And so as a substitute for that, or an alternative, you can use some blankets. And so what we're going to be doing with the blankets is we're going to be using them to lie on, to support the body. So I will momentarily, I'll explain to you how you can use them. But for now, you just want to have them. So 2 or 3 of them, not like thick, puffy kinds of things, but just blankets that will fold somewhat flat. And if you have some pillows or cushions, that could be helpful, at least 2 of them kind of equal in size. Those are optional. It's all optional, but these things will be helpful to those who want to use them. And that will become clear why once we get to that point. If you happen to have, if you just happen to have an eye pillow, you could get an eye pillow. That would also be great. If you don't have those things, if you don't have any of those things, don't sweat it. And you're going to want a space that you can lie down on, probably on the floor, if that works for you. If you're not a sort of person who gets up and down from the floor, then you can do it in bed. But if you can do it on the floor comfortably, then that would be better. So some sort of somewhat padded space, like a carpeted floor or on a rug or on a yoga mat or something like that, so that or put a blanket out so that the parts of you that are actually going to be in contact with the floor will be a little bit cushioned and comfortable. Not so much that you're like sinking into something, but so that you're not going to be on concrete or hardwood or whatever might be the case. So now that I've explained those things, let's talk briefly. We're going to get into the guided practice, and there will be one today, I promise. But I want to give you a little bit of explanation of what we're doing and why. So, so as you likely know, we've been exploring in recent weeks. We've been exploring Ujjayi Pranayama, and I've gotten some feedback, and I really appreciate that because it's very helpful. I don't know what your experience is unless you give me that feedback. It's, if we were in person, then, I would be able to observe more carefully, and I would be able to see things. But since we're at a distance and I don't even get to see you on camera most of the time, which is fine. I'm not, it's totally fine. And it wouldn't, they're so small, I wouldn't really be able to see much anyway. But just by the nature of the way we're doing this, I can't really give you any feedback based on observation because I can't really observe you, but you can observe you. And if you're having confusion, doubts, concerns, questions, something seems too hard, if you're straining, these kinds of things, then let me know, because then these are not for, I don't know if somehow, so maybe I should make it clear. None of this is for me. This is all for you. And so it makes no sense whatsoever for me to be describing something or giving instruction on something that you don't feel comfortable or confident in doing because you have questions or concerns or whatever. So when you let me know those things, that's really great. And it helps all of us, because I'm sure that those who have shared that they were having some challenges with Ujjayi Pranayama, you're not the only ones, So, um, so we're kind of taking a step back and looking at some of the more fundamental things here, because that's always helpful. And really, it's the more fundamental things are the more essential. And so a lot of times we get really caught up in all of these complexities that are not necessary, really. In fact, if we're struggling with all the complexities, we really want to make it simpler for ourselves. But with this Ujjayi Pranayama, there's a reason why I've been sharing it, at least one would hope. And I can tell you a little bit about that. I won't take a whole long time with it, because I do want to get to the guided practice, but I just want to give some background information so that you can understand what the potential here is and why we would be doing it. So in general, we're interested in naturalness. I don't know if you knew that, but if you just take a moment and look directly inwardly at what it is that you really want, you'll see that you could use other words, you could describe it in many ways, and none of them would necessarily be better or worse. But this is a potentially helpful way of understanding it, that what we want is naturalness. Contrast that with what the alternative to naturalness would be, which would be unnaturalness, or we could say rigidity, mechanical nature. So that's a contradiction in terms. I guess I shouldn't say mechanical nature, mechanicalness. So now look and see that much of your life, in fact, is rigid, mechanical. It's clunky, awkward, and largely unconscious. I mean, that's really kind of the point, is that it has to be unconscious for those things to be true. Now that gets us into so many difficulties, doesn't it? I mean, if you look at all the problems that you have, and here, when I say problem, I'm really saying at this point, I'm talking initially about at the surface level, where we think about the problems. We say, well, I've got this problem with this person and that problem with that person, and I got this problem with finances, and this problem with the house, and this problem with the neighbor, and this problem with my arm, and this problem with my head, and this problem with my emotions, and yada, 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 all these different problems. Well, all of those problems, you don't, if you knew actually what they were and what the solution was, you wouldn't really have a problem. You'd just have, you'd have some knowledge. But so the problem, we could say, is really that you just don't know. And it's not even that you don't know so much as it's that your relationship with not knowing, that you're fearful of not knowing. So this fear is because of this mechanicalness, this unnaturalness, because we don't know. We have a lack of clarity and trust in our ability to actually be here. We're afraid just to be here, and we're so uncomfortable just to be here. So we're constantly looking out there to try and figure out how to get safe and how to get what we think we're missing and all these things. So if you really let in this notion of naturalness, then hopefully you'll see, wow, that really is what I want. I really just want that naturalness. Like, it's like it's said in the New Testament, look at the lilies of the field, or I don't know what something about birds. I could maybe brush up on that one, but something about lilies of the field and birds. But the idea here is that you see, look how hard you're working all the time, and look at the rest of nature. Now you've set yourself apart from nature in your mind, which is why you believe that the rest of nature is fine being nature, but not you. You have to work really hard. So you're creating this fiction of yourself as unnatural, but you're living it out, and it's very uncomfortable. So there are various ways that it's been pointed out to us through various teachings and teachers and whatnot. But the aim is always, in a sense, to discover and live this naturalness, to be natural, which means spontaneous, present, and without unnecessary effort, without the strain, so that there's a flow, that everything that is happening as oneness. There's a single happening occurring. There's not I'm working against nature, but that I am natural. I am nature itself. I am the working of nature. So now there are. So hopefully I've convinced you of that, or not convinced you so much, but hopefully you can see the truth of that. That would be wonderful, wouldn't it? If you didn't have to, if you didn't feel compelled to give so much attention to all of the worries and anxieties and frustrations and upsets and so forth. If you actually had if you were really, let's say, anchored in this naturalness, so that you never lost it, you never fell out of it, you just were always in this naturalness. So there are various systems, as I said, various teachings, and this we can get very hung up in debating, this one versus that one, and which one is the best one, and they seem to be in conflict with one another. This one says to do this thing, and this other one says to do this other thing, and I can't do both of them because they seem to be in opposition to one another. Like with something like breathing, because breathing is often, not surprisingly, a part of the various approaches, systems, because breathing is natural. But this one says breathe in this, big way, and this one says breathe in this small way, and this one says breathe in with your attention on this place, and the other one says breathe with your attention in this other place, and this one says circulate the breath, and this one says retain the breath, and all of these things. And we're thinking, oh my goodness, how do I make sense of all this? Well, we kind of just have to go with one and be willing to trust in it. And so I'm proposing, because I have familiarity with it, because I have experienced benefits from it, because I can speak from some direct knowledge on the subject, and because I know that it is, has a tradition that is reliable and trustworthy, and so I believe that it is safe, gentle, and good. So that's why I'm proposing it. This Ujjayi Pranayama, I believe, addresses in a very good, precise way many of the challenges that we have, and much of the mechanicalness that we struggle with. So on the surface, it's like, well, how can I use a system which is somewhat artificial in a sense, in order to bring about naturalness? And I asked the question, so maybe it's a valid question. Let's see. Yes, let's see. Well, I would say that the problem with the question is that it presumes that we're already able to be natural without any system. And it turns out that despite our attempts to prove that that is so, it doesn't work, because we're actually caught in a vicious cycle in which we generate our unnaturalness unconsciously. So we're in the habit of producing the unconsciousness, and so that's what happens by default. So we do need a system, it turns out. And so I hope that you can, I hope that that makes sense. So this general notion here, and this is something that we'll just take a few more minutes and then we'll get into it, but this is all relevant to our exploration, because I want you to understand what it is that we're really aiming at, and how we can use this particular approach, this particular system, in order to serve as a guide that can help us to discover that, so that we can get the benefits of naturalness, which means that we can feel better, that we can function better, that we can more quickly resolve our problems at all levels, rather than struggling and actually unconsciously maintaining them. So the general idea here is one of, we could say, of energy, and also of consciousness, and to see that energy and consciousness are not actually separate. But in our normal way of understanding, which is fairly crude, we normally think of energy just in terms of one kind of axis, as it were, which is either more or less. So it's about amount, volume, you could say. And so we say, I have too little energy, I have too much energy. If we have too much energy, we say, oh, I'm agitated, I'm irritated, I'm inflamed, I'm anxious, worried, and so forth. If we have too little energy, we say, oh, I'm so tired, I'm fatigued, I'm, this, that, and the other. So we think in this very crude sense of energy, just more or less. What we fail to understand, though, is that, and this is very important, is that energy is tied with consciousness. And so it's not just about more or less, it's about the consciousness that is present. So if we have a relatively low level of consciousness and a relatively high level of energy, we have some bad situations, like it's going to erupt in violence. It's going to produce a lot of anxiety, nervousness, fear, and so forth. So that's not a good situation. If we have a relatively high level of consciousness but a relatively low level of energy, then we have another not so great situation. Now we can say this is a better situation than the previous, but there's a mismatch, and so we're not really able to we want to match the energy and the consciousness together, so that the energy is like, it's somewhat a crude metaphor, but think of an engine, and the engine, in order to operate in a harmonious way, if such a thing is possible, then there has to be a somewhat steady provision of fuel, right? Because if the fuel is provided in fits and starts, if there's too much, let's say with like a gas powered engine, then the engine is flooded, and so then it doesn't work. If there's too little, then it can't function because it can't fire, so it doesn't work. So too little or too much, no good. We want just the right amount. So with energy and consciousness, it's similar. So I'm not that well versed, but I don't know if it has origins prior to the tantric tradition, but I do know that in the tantric tradition, which I know most people don't really understand because it's been somewhat sensationalized, but it's a philosophical and spiritual system that's quite old, and this describes an energy system in the human and in the cosmos, and it describes these in great detail, which we don't need to concern ourselves with. And it says that the energy travels in these channels, and it catalogs 72,000 of them. So these are very sophisticated people who created this system, or who saw the system, who were able to describe the system. But of them, only 3 are really the ones that control everything, we could say. So if these 3 are functioning optimally, then we know everything else is functioning optimally. And this is good news, because then we don't have to be so concerned with all of it. These 3 function, everything functions, all is well. Well, of the 3, it turns out, actually only one of them is the one that we really actually need to concern ourselves with. So this is very excellent. But they have names. It's the Ida and the Pingala are these 2 nadis, and they sort of interpenetrate with this 3rd one, which is called the Sushumna, and they forming like a caduceus shape. Okay. Well, now I know this all sounds really complicated, but bear with me for just a moment, it will make sense. So the notion is that as the energy is balanced on the Ida and Pingala, that then the energy is allowed to flow upward through the central channel, the Sushumna. And it said that when this energy is flowing in the proper way upward through the Sushumna, then there's the blossoming of the human, that actually then, only then, is there really the fulfillment of the human potential, the human life. So it's like, basically, it sounds like, oh, that sounds very advanced and only for a few special people. But really what we're saying is, hey, you're not functioning optimally, but you could. And that's really what you should be doing. Like, you're kind of like, if the engine it's not functioning optimally, you want to do something about that rather than ruining the car or not being able to drive the car or whatever. So the notion here is that this is really what, all the stuff that you're feeling like, oh, this isn't right and that's not right and nothing's quite right and you can't get it all right enough. That's really, when you think of it in energetic terms. So just understand it just as metaphor, at least. You don't have to necessarily accept it as literally true, though it might be. But even if you just start to open to this as metaphorical, in the same way that all, neurotransmitters and all that business is really metaphorical, but we've kind of accepted that that's the truth, and we say, oh, all this other stuff is not real. But no, let's understand them at least on equal footing, 2 different metaphorical spaces that we can explore. And let's just explore this one. So we can really, actually, it turns out, just bring our attention to this central channel. And the central channel, we're told, it's a subtle body. It doesn't exist in 3D space, but it's a very subtle layer of 3D. But that our somatic sense of it is that it exists somewhat along or in or near to and aligned with the spine. So it just gives you a sense of where you might look for this thing inwardly. You just start to sense it. And then we're told that there are these 7 major energy, like vortices, like when the energy is traveling through the nadis, all 72,000 of them, there are lots of these little places where they intersect, and energy has to spin and go in different directions, or whatever might be the case. So these are given a name, called a chakra, which means wheel or disc or vortex. And so there are 7 major ones they're the 7 major in the whole system, and there's 7 major ones along the central channel. And so we all kind of maybe know these at this point because we've heard of them. At least we've gone, oh yeah, I've heard of those chakras. So here we just want to understand that they are they correspond to levels of consciousness. Okay, so for our purposes, we don't really need to, even really think about although it can be useful, but we won't go into it today, or we won't get to the practice, but we won't go into all of the everything that they each of them represent. But we'll just say for now, they're different states of consciousness. The lowest being the densest, the highest being the least dense, and the rarest, and sort of a continuous spectrum between the two. Don't think of one is good and the other is bad. We often make that mistake. It's not like that. It's just it's a polarity. Okay, so it's like a very fundamental polarity to our existence. It's just a very fundamental energetic polarity, so that we can understand that all of creation, in a sense, starts from the subtlest and takes its shape by becoming denser and denser and denser and denser and denser until it becomes the most condensed, and then we say we have the physical reality, the physical manifestation of it, and then it's dissolved by reversing that. So as long as we have any kind of experience, we're fools to say that the physical manifestation is inherently problematic or bad, because then we're just fighting with nature, you see. So just to bring it back full circle, to see that we don't want to be fighting with nature. We want the flow, which is naturalness. So the idea here then is that each of these major chakras, if they're let's say functioning optimally, just to kind of conceptualize it, then what happens is that the energy there, it provides a kind of, we could say, buoyance, because the general sense here is that the energy is flowing upward. Well, think about it. You want to have that sense of buoyancy, that sense of upwardness, so that you have a sense that, like, you're not having to do all of this. It's almost a bit like being a puppet, but you're the puppet master at the same time. It's not like you're being controlled by some greater puppet master, but you are the puppet master. But that you're recognizing that this you who is the puppet master is like up above somehow. Okay, so you kind of get that sense that, like, this is extending up above you and you're up there. You have a sense of yourself here, but also up there. And so this up here, when you have this, when your primary center of consciousness, let's say, is up here, and all the rest of it is functioning well enough, then you have this great sense of buoyancy, like, and everything becomes lighter. Everything becomes much easier, rather than this very heavy sense, this very dense sense of slogging through it that most of us have. So that's the general idea, is that through this practice, we can start to recognize this general energetic sense, so that we can lighten things a bit, and we can start to function from this higher level of consciousness, while everything else is also firing on all cylinders, as it were, so that everything is smooth. Because what happens, you'll notice, and this will be the last thing, and then we'll get to the practice, is that you can have this experience of being buoyant for an instant. And I often invite that, just like that, just like a finger snap. You just let go and you just notice there is this buoyancy. But then you notice what happens, if you observe, is you get pulled back into this stuff, and the next thing you know, you're all kind of ugh. And if you notice, where does your center of energy go? In a sense, it goes down, and it gets kind of clumpy. Something's not working very well. Things aren't flowing very well. So, and when I say up and down, it's not that it's not that we're not disconnecting. So this is a very grounded thing. It's more akin to the general sense of of the general sense, usually traditionally in many cultures that I'm aware of, is that there's the heaven, there's the earth, and that the human is between the two. Now, this is one of those things where you're like, well, yeah, okay, makes sense. There's the heaven up there. I can see the heavens, and I'm on the earth. We can take it almost too literally in a way that is unnatural. But to understand that actually energetically, our actual real truer sense of ourselves is that we are between the heaven and the earth, and we are what connects them. So that we're like, there's a kind of natural tension that exists, that's because we are the conduit between the heaven and the earth. And so when we allow that, then we experience that flow, so that it's a connected experience. Okay, so enough of that for now, but I hope that makes sense in general, just for the context, so you can understand. And I'm happy to hear that feedback, that someone has loved doing Ujjayi Pranayama, because I'm glad, because it's that's the point. So today we're going to be doing this practice that will be starting to really understand and experience the most important basics for Ujjayi. And so again, I don't know, some people might have joined after I gave the instruction for the props. To just, if you're wanting to follow along with guided practice, you're going to want to have probably some props, a couple of blankets that you can use, and then you're going to want to have some space where you can lie down. If you can do it on the floor, do it there. If you don't do the floor, then you can do the bed or something like that. Okay, so with the pillows, with the blankets, so the general idea is that we're going to be lying down on the back, and we want to have, now if we just lie down on the back, what happens is, and this is, we tend to get stuck in these habits of tension in the abdomen that we are not, and the chest, the whole torso. We have these habits of holding tension. So in Hannah's terms, we would call this sensory motor amnesia. And because we're amnesic on the matter, we don't know. We know something's not right. We know we don't feel great, but we don't know what it is. And we have no clue whatsoever that it's this tension that we're chronically holding in the chest and the abdomen. So, and specifically here, it's both green light and red light, but it's particularly, I would say, red light. It depends on the individual, but we're going to use these blankets in order to open up the front of the body, and particularly to position the spine and the ribs in such a way, and the pelvis in such a way, that we can not so easily reproduce our habitual tension. And it's going to allow us to start to breathe naturally using our thoracic diaphragm. So when we hear people give instructions for belly breathing and abdominal breathing, it's the intention, usually, I think, what's actually meant is use the diaphragm. Unfortunately, because of these habits that we have of sensory motor amnesia, we can't do it unless we have some specific practice that awakens that for us. So that's what this is intended to be. So we want to, we're going to start by folding one blanket, and you're going to fold the blanket It's going to depend on the blanket that you have, the sizes and dimensions and everything, but you're going to want to fold it in one way, in half, so that the shorter length, now that it's folded in half, that shorter bit, it will be able to fit roughly from your sacrum to your head. So that will be about that length, so that when you're lying down, you're going to be lying down on the blanket in that way. So you want to be able to have all of that part of you on the blanket supported. Then you're going to fold that blanket several more times. So you've got it the lengthwise, and you're going to fold it lengthwise so that you end up with something that's rectangular, quite a bit longer than it is wide. And this will be your one of your props. So you can try putting that down on the floor and then lying down with it placed there from about the sacrum to the head, so that whole part of your spine and your back is supported. Your pelvis will be anteriorly tilted. Your abdomen and chest are going to be slightly more open. That's the idea here. Now, once you've tried that out, you can judge whether more might be helpful. Yeah, lower back, upper. Well, it's got to be head. I don't have a a blanket here to demonstrate, but I've got like this yoga mat. Apparently my this yoga mat kind of, okay, so this would be a little too short for me, but this is kind of generally the kind of length that you're going to be needing, or a little bit longer than this, so that it can support the back of your head all the way to the very lower back. And so you get a sense of if that feels adequate. Now, you could, for some people, they're going to want more. So you could take a second blanket, fold it similarly, and stack it on top of the other, okay? And see how that is. And then and in that case, you might also I have to see what that comment was. Below your head, not the pillow. We haven't gotten to that yet. The pillow is not for the head. So you can stagger them a little bit. So you want something that's comfortable, but that opens up the front side of the body. This is the idea. So you can play around with it. So you want it to be stable, but you also want to be able to kind of get yourself opened up. Now, maybe you want to use a third blanket. You could use a third blanket for that, but I had been thinking that the third blanket would be for the back of the head. So the idea here is that once you're supported in this way, you probably are also going to want to bring the head just a little bit up. So you can take another blanket and kind of just, fold it a few times and just put it underneath the head on top of the other blankets, but under the head, so that it gives you just a little bit of elevation. You don't want to fold it really thick so that you're like giant thick pillow, but just a few times, and then lay it lengthwise across behind the head, and that should help support the head, so the head's not doesn't feel like it's tilting back. It feels more aligned. Now, For most people, this will be great and all that's wanted. Um, you could just have your legs straight, resting on the floor in a way, in whatever way is comfortable for you. Now, if you happen to have, I don't know, it's like some sandbags or something. I don't know who would have sandbags lying around, but if you had something of that sort, something that would be put some weight on your thighs, that's also a really nice touch, because what happens is we hold so much tension there in the connection between the pelvis and the thighs, in that groin and in the inguinal creases and all that. Uh, this also interferes with our naturalness. So, it keeps us stuck. This is an important, bringing it back to the energetic thing. It keeps us stuck. Our attention keeps having to come back to trying to deal with this stuff that's at a very low level of consciousness, not a bad level of consciousness, just low. So this, that way down there, we're talking about stuff that's going to be, I mean, traditionally, we're thinking about stuff that's like survival and and procreative, so kind of where most people are functioning from most of the time. They're not bad, but just we don't want to be limited to only that, because we haven't worked, we've got a bunch of stuff down there that we're not aware of. So energetically, we can become aware of it. So at the very least, just become aware of that area now. You could maybe, if you can take your hands and take, like, you're going to like karate chop, don't chop, but just like karate chop hands, and gently just run them there, kind of in the inguinal creases, just sort of glide them back and forth, and just gently but firmly, and just feel that, wow, I could just soften and let go here. I don't have to hold on to all of that stuff. So you really can start to, it's like this miracle thing that happens if you allow it. You really honestly could feel so much better and different in just a short amount of time if you just allow it. And you notice if maybe you have habitual resistance to it, like there's just this built-in fear and resistance, like I can't soften, I'm tough. Well, why? Let your legs be heavy. Let your pelvis relax. You're here, you're supported. Okay, so that's going to be really good for most people. But if you're somebody who you got a bit more flexibility, you might really like the, it's called Baddha Konasana, bound angle pose. It's what we, in gym class, we used to do butterfly stretches, that thing where you just like flap your legs up and down kind of thing. You can, so if you're wanting to explore that, that can also be very nice. You would quite possibly, though, want to have your pillows or cushions nearby, because this is where we would use them, because most people are not open enough that they can right away let their knees come out and touch the floor and feel comfortable there. Although I want you to know that it's definitely, you're designed to do it. It's just the fear that prevents you. But we'll want to support. So the idea here is, if you want to, and if not, then don't, please, but you bring your soles of your feet together. And so your knees are out to the sides. And, most people can't, they get their knees are like 45-degree angle from the floor kind of business. So if you're one of those people and you're kind of like, I don't know, I can't hold it any longer. Well, that's not the idea. The idea is, it's not an endurance test. We want to open and relax. So, but if you're way up there, try putting the cushions or pillows under the thighs, between the thighs and the floor, and see if you can get them in such a way that you can really let the legs relax, let the groin relax, so that you're totally supported by the cushions or pillows. Now, if that doesn't work for you, then don't do it. Just straighten the legs out. But in either case, you still just take those hands, the karate chop hands, and just run them there in the inguinal creases, and just like inwardly there, sense inwardly, feel like you can actually feel inwardly at that area. It's not just your hand doing the feeling. You can actually feel from the inguinal creases out to the hands. Let your groin do the feeling of the hands as much as the hands are doing the feeling of the groin. And see that they can come to meet. And then there's what a wonderful thing it is. You're not so hard, you're not so tough, you're not so in pain. And notice that when you do that, it's like, wow, can you feel the shift in consciousness? Finally, a little bit at least, your attention doesn't have to be so drawn to this constant tension, because you can start to soften. You can start to actually open there so that the energy can flow. If you're holding on, gripping, the energy is not flowing. You're like holding the energy, you're pulling it down. You want to trust that it's okay. Soften. The energy starts to flow. So start to feel okay. Maybe you start to feel a little bit higher then. So you start to notice, like, just below the belly button, this lower abdomen now. Kind of, you can just take your hands and just gently make some circles there in that area, between the pubic bone and the belly button. And just please make sure that you're very supported and comfortable here. So this is not an endurance thing. It's really, really important. So you can make adjustments. And if you need, don't make unnecessary adjustments, but it's okay. You don't have to just be rigid and still and tough it out for the next 10, 15 minutes. You can move things around if you need. Do different blanket, whatever, however you want to do it. Find a good way for you. It's really, really well worth the investment of finding the good way for you today, because it makes all the difference. If you're not setting yourself up in a good way so you can really feel supported, you're going to have a really hard time letting go and feeling and letting the energy flow. Otherwise, you're just going to be there on the floor, gripping, afraid. So if it took, honestly, if you just spent the rest of the time, if you're like, I can't quite get it right, I feel too afraid to let go. Okay. If you took the rest of the time for this meeting just to find the right way to do the blankets or whatever, or to just lie on the floor, whatever it is, if you take the time to find that and open to that, that will be the best thing. It really will. So, but if you're in already feeling like, okay, I'm good, I'm in a pretty decent spot here, I think I can let go some, then good, you're then even better. So if you're there and you're like, I'm okay, I'm supported, and you kind of can feel that softness in the groin, you can let the thighs be heavy, you can really feel the buttocks there on the floor or whatever, the bed or whatever you're on, but you really feel the heaviness of it, the weight of it. Let it all go. You don't have to hold it up. You don't have to tense it up. You don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to squeeze anything. You don't have to go anywhere. You don't have to protect anything. You don't have to defend anything. You don't have to achieve anything. You don't have to worry about anything for this moment. So you let it go like that, like really give everything to letting it go. Letting go isn't it's actually an active, engaged process. Like you have to be so fully present that you can really feel the weight of the legs. I mean, these legs are heavy. Really, they're heavy. But we don't usually perceive their weight in that way. We might feel like we're dragging them around, but we don't feel the weight as in the support of them. So we want to feel into that. So you feel that now. Feel how the groin can be soft. How then take your fingers and find the pubic bone. I should have said from the beginning, I think you should be wearing comfortable clothing for these so that you can do these things. Okay. Because it makes a big difference. So you feel there and just feel the same thing. Like maybe you don't even know where you can't, like, I can't find a pubic bone. I don't know where to find the pubic bone. This is how little we know ourselves. So it's okay, but just you kind of know the general area. So see if you can, what do you find in that area? If you're not sure where the bone is, or if you're not sure that what you're touching is the bone, or which part of that might be bone and which part might be something else, great. So notice here the same thing that we were doing. Now let that area feel inwardly, rather than using your hands like this is some alien territory. Like, what is this? I might get spooked at any moment, or I might break it. Know that you're engaging with yourself. You're both, you can both be present in the fingertips and inside at the pubic bone at the same time, so that there's a meeting. So you let that happen, and then you feel inwardly how you're resisting the meeting, and soften and let the meeting happen. So that you'll feel it's a miracle. I promise you. I mean, I'm not by I am that is actually true. I want you to understand. It's not some exaggerated statement. And I want you to experience that. It's possible. It's not hard. It's really not. It's so easy. You just have to trust that you actually are alive. You can do this. You can feel inwardly there. Whatever you're afraid of, whatever you're angry about, whatever your confusion might be, just know that you can do it, and just do it and feel that miracle, and don't dismiss it either. Don't say, oh, it's not a good enough miracle. There are no, you can't have good enough or not good enough miracles. You can't have big miracles or small miracles. Actually, all miracles are equal. They're all miracles. They're all miracles. So it's only our judgments that describe them in those wrong terms. So when you really just open to the miracle, then be willing to open all the way to it. Don't dismiss it. Don't downplay it. Don't say it's not enough. Well, how do you know it's not enough? Maybe it's the dismissal and the saying it's not enough that keeps this deadness coming back. And instead, the mechanicalness coming back, the armoredness. But I want you to know that you're always here. You're always alive. So start to open to the reality that you can be natural, and that in that naturalness there is bliss, there is pleasure, there is aliveness. And so you don't have to be doing this hard thing all the time. So you feel that meeting now in between fingers and this miracle happening within. Let there actually be a meeting so that the within comes forth to meet. I mean, feel that literally. You can soften and release and let the inner come out to meet and touch the fingers, and you'll feel it happening. I really literally mean this. So I'm pointing to an actual experience that you can choose and feel, and you'll experience the confirmation of it when you have that experience and you recognize it. And it's a very important experience because because then you can start to repeat it and generalize it. So now bring the fingers up a little higher, a couple inches up higher, and just make these little circles and just do the same thing. You have this loving, gentle, supportive intention with the fingers, and then meet that inwardly with a surrender to it, so that there's a meeting from the inside out, so that there's really a release of all of that bound up energy, all of that energy that's been used or misused to maintain all of this hardness and rigidity and mechanicalness and fear and all the rest of it. Just keep working your way up. So this around the belly button, this is really, really powerful place. So, this is where we're digesting everything. It's where we're receiving and turning, converting it into ourselves. And so very, very powerful fire. But when we're sometimes afraid of that fire, we've put out the fire, and it's all, so the energy's bound up. So we want to just do the same thing here, just circle the belly button with the fingers. Just kind of let the skin be soft, let the skin move. The skin can actually move quite freely if we allow it. It's attached in a very fluid way. There's a lot of fluid beneath the skin, so the skin can slide, and it's safe to let it slide. You don't have any yank and pull and nothing violent. Just feel and allow, and you'll notice how much you didn't know you were doing it, but you were holding a lot of tension there. Like the fluid wasn't flowing because of all the tension. The skin is sticking and doesn't want it. It's not. And so, the skin gets dried out, and there's a lot of, or it's patchy, or it's inflamed, or all kinds of things can happen. It gets wrinkly because it's not like it needs to be fluidly connected, not rigidly connected. So you allow that. There's a lymphatic fluid all underneath there, so it's just like, it's how your tissues are nourished, and it's how your tissues are how they do their waste disposal. There's a lot going on there, but it needs to be allowed to flow. So feel that the skin can move, and that you can choose that. And then just a little deeper than that, you feel what's there. Because there's a big muscle there, very powerful muscle, and protecting here, but it's constricting actually, because we don't need that level of protection. So here, just as we've done before, you can feel inwardly and let it release. And then just keep moving the fingers up in this way. So you're just between the navel and the breastbone there, you've got that area is often very, very tight. And this is keep preventing the diaphragm from really freely moving. So the lungs are not moved properly. And it makes a difference how the lungs move, because think about if the lungs are just being move by the ribs, then that's a very different movement than if the diaphragm is gently causing the lungs to descend and thereby passively draw in air. So this is a point that Iyengar makes, that, and he says that in pranayama, differentiating pranayama from non-pranayama breathing, that the inhalation is done by he says it's done by the lungs. So kind of makes sense, actually. He's saying it's done by the lungs versus if it's not pranayama, he says the inhalation is done by the brain. So he says, if you want to have the benefits, you let the inhalation be done by the lungs. And this seems a little bit strange, I know, but actually it makes quite a lot of sense. So we've talked about this in the context of Buteyko, that we have the brain detects carbon dioxide levels. And when the carbon dioxide levels reach a certain point in the lungs, then the brain says, breathe. And so we breathe. But that turns out to be mechanical because it's not actually, it's indirect, you see, it's an indirect measure. It's not actually attuned to the body. It's really just noticing something in the lungs, but not so much the rest of the body. So that in that case, we tend to have less diaphragmatic breathing. Things get really stuck, bound up, tense. We are depleting our carbon dioxide levels, which further constricts things. So we feel more uptight. The more uptight we feel, the more our consciousness gets drawn down. And in some sense, this is a sensible thing, because then we start to maybe notice the body more. But the problem is we've got so much stuff there that spooks us. So rather than actually noticing that, hey, I need to relax, instead we are just continually spooked. And so we're very anxious and exhausted. So here he says, you keep your attention in the body. So let your eyes be gazing downward gently, not forcefully, but just so that your attention stays in the body. You're not giving your attention to these sort of abstract thoughts that preoccupy much of our time. Because if we're giving our attention to those abstract thoughts, those worrisome thoughts or vengeful thoughts or whatever may be the case, anxious thoughts, then what's happening is we're breathing from the brain, which means we're going to be breathing too much. And this is going to produce all kinds of disturbances because our breath determines the experience, to put it simply. So knowing that we are presently in such a state that if we were to allow our attention to go up to those abstract thoughts, those worrisome, anxious thoughts, that we would just get ourselves in a great deal of trouble because we would just continue to hyperventilate and produce the same problems that maintain the same habits. So instead, we want to keep the gaze down and inward. So you're looking gently in a relaxed way, as if you were gazing interiorly into the self. So, however you want to understand that, but just let that be the general idea. Because then what you'll notice is your attention tends to more easily thereby stay with the internal perception and aliveness and consciousness that allows you to then soften and release these habits of unnecessary effort and tension and armoring all the hardness. So then you'll start to notice that rather than your breathing being mechanical, your breathing starts to be natural. But maybe it seems a little strange at first because you're not accustomed to it. Just continue in this way. And when you get to the sternum, the breastbone, then just do the same basic thing, but moving out along the lowest ribs. So just below the lowest ribs, so that you're just softening and releasing consciously from within. And you're just noticing then that, yes, you're breathing. So there's breathing happening, but notice that you're breathing so that the abdomen is remaining soft, or at least softer. And you're continuing to allow it to soften so that now the chest also can open up. Everything's not being contracted on the front side of the body. You can release it and relax it. So turns out you actually got a lot more space in there than you thought, and it doesn't have to be so hard, so much work. Notice actually when you allow this much softness and release in the abdomen, notice that your attention naturally starts to just not have to be drawn down there so much to be constantly trying to process all of this stuff. You can actually start to really feel the pleasure and ease of just allowing that natural softness in the abdomen, and more also in the chest and the abdomen, including the right and left side of the abdomen. So as you're moving the fingers, and sometimes you can just kind of stroke. It's nice just to stroke down the lower ribs. So you just kind of take the fingers and just find the base of the sternum where the ribs, the lowest ribs on the chest, meet there in the center. And then you just stroke gently down the shape of those lowest ribs, which will come out and down to the sides. And just notice as you're doing that there's a lot you can soften in there that you didn't realize you were holding so tight. And if you really let those strokes come all the way down and to the sides, you start to feel how much you've been holding tense all throughout there that you didn't know you were doing. And you can actually choose to continue to release that. Now, at first, it seems strange because you're so accustomed to holding that when you release it, your brain starts to say, I must be straining. This must be effortful. This must be really hard. I don't know how to do this. And so it's a bit of a thing that goes for a while that you're thinking, I can't do it. It's too hard. And then so you start tensing up again. It's a funny business in that way, but you have to start to see or really experience directly in this way as we've been exploring today. So you start to really notice the truth of it for yourself, that, wow, it's true that here I am, I can do this exercise, and I can really feel that the abdomen and chest can really soften in such a profound way that I hadn't realized. And really, truly, it doesn't require any effort on my part. It's not harder. It's quite wonderful and nice and liberating, and everything is better. My guts aren't so squeezed. I can actually, maybe finally I'll be able to digest something. And you start to realize this is so much better. You really want to make that connection that surely this is better. Has to be. Surely it's better to allow for the abdomen to have the space and softness so that the energy can flow, so that the food can digest, so that the blood can flow and the lymph can flow and all the things can do their thing. We must definitely know that that is true, and then recognize that all of this habitual tension here is really interfering with that naturalness. And I'm just in the habit of doing it, but it's not necessary and it's not good. So even though my brain continues to tell me, but I have to do it because it's hard not to. I'm so exhausted not making all that effort. It's so weird, but the brain gets exhausted not making the habitual effort, even though actually it uses less energy. So it's an adjustment, and it takes a little while, but you have to keep coming back again and again and realizing directly in this way that, yes, this is better. My abdomen is softer. My belly can relax. My guts can move. I can breathe. My chest is open. My face can relax. My tongue can relax. I feel better, calmer. And then you watch and you see how it is that you start to feel the compulsion to do the thing again. And it's just a process. So you have to be willing to do it. It's a practice. So I'm recommending that for anybody who's found this beneficial, I recommend that you do this daily, because it will continue to be beneficial. You're basically just, remember, the goal is naturalness, but since our habit is unnaturalness, we're fools to think that we don't need to utilize a system to help restore naturalness, because otherwise all we're doing is allowing the default, which is unnaturalness. So here is a system that I hope you have experienced directly as making connections for you, so that I really sincerely hope that this really, like, some things clicked for you, that you were able to recognize in your direct experience some new possibilities, that you gain new insight, and that you have a clearer sense of how of of what you can do that will help you, and you're convinced that sure enough it really it really will help you, because it's already helped you. It's helped you right now. The question isn't really, can it help me? It's just, can I stop interfering with the help? And that's a process. So we have to keep taking the help, do the practice in not in a mechanical way, obviously, but in a present way, like I hope that you've done today, because then you experience the benefits. And you can't really doubt it, because that's why I'm saying these are real experiences that you shouldn't be able to doubt. If you have doubts, I want you to let me know, so that I can clear them up, because that will be the best way forward for all of us. Is that if you have a doubt or confusion or anything, you let me know. We can clear it up, hopefully, and then bit by bit, step by step. It's like we're taking a journey. So we know, if I'm the guide, hopefully I know where we're going, where we are, and how to get there, more or less. And so but if we have, that's why I say we always have to start where we are. If we're trying to start somewhere else, we're not gonna do very well, because we're looking, we're saying, well, the map says that there's a bridge 2 feet ahead, but there's no bridge there because we're not where we think we are. So if you have doubts or confusions, let's clear it up. And then we can all be together on the journey, and we can have a lot of success with it. So I do recommend that you practice it every day, and you'll discover new things each day, and make sure it's fresh and alive each day, because that's how it will work best. So if you're not willing or able to do it in a fresh and live way, then I guess don't do it. But see that it's worth doing it in a fresh and alive way, so then do it that way. Make sure that it's gentle, and then it will be pleasurable, and you'll look forward to doing it. So I think that's all for today. So thank you very much. And please, if you do have any questions or anything, let me know about them sooner rather than later, and that way we can address them sooner rather than later. And that's it. So bye for now. Thank you very much, and blessings to you all.